You ready for round 2? We got our yarn and we got our trusty 3.5s and we're good to go. This yarn is a little thicker than the one we used for square 1, even though it claims to be the same gauge, and this happens pretty often. You can see here clearly, top one's thinner than the bottom one. So when you get some yarn, you need to verify the wraps per inch. This is how you do that. And it will determine the amount of stitches you need to cast on to get, like, well, in this case, a 10 centimeter by 10 centimeter square or a 4 inch by 4 inch square. So I'm going to show you how to start the long tail cast on without a slip knot. This is for people who don't like metal. To do so, hold the yarn like this and simply begin without the slip knot. It's exactly the same, but instead you end up with these 2 loops. You know, it's a minor difference. I barely feel like it's important to mention this, but I mean, some people really get bothered by the slip knot, so that's how you solve it. So we're going to cast on 20 stitches. That's going to give us 10 centimeters or 4 inches. For those of you just joining us now and are not familiar with the long tail cast on method that we're using here, I'm going to place a link to a video describing it in the top left. I mentioned something in the end of the last video regarding purl stitches and knit stitches being the same thing. In other words, 2 sides of the same coin. And that is the theme of this tutorial. We're not trying to make anything necessarily pretty or even functional. So anyway, we got 20 stitches. Count over them just to verify. 20, okay, 20 were good. So once again, identify the tail end and keep that under paw. And then jump into position with the working yarn. Make sure you have the correct one. And what we're going to do now is we're going to start in a similar fashion, right? You see here, that kind of looks like purl stitches on the side and knit stitches on that side. So let's just start with knitting. So we're going to slip the first one purlwise, and then we're going to knit 18. And if you're not sure what I mean by slipping purlwise or by knitting, which I'm doing right now, there's a link to a video describing knitting in the top left, and there's a link to a video describing how to slip purlwise in the top right. So we're just going to keep on with the good work. It's very similar to what we were doing on square 1, this first row anyway. The trickiness is going to come on the second row and every even numbered row thereafter. So every odd row, so 1, 3, 5, etc., are going to be slip 1 purlwise, knit 18, and then purl 1, like we're doing right now. So this is 16, 17, no, 18. Yes, and then we purl 1. And again, if you don't understand what I mean by purl, just click the link in the top left and there's a video describing the purl stitch. So we just turn around now to the purl side. So we begin the same way by slipping 1 stitch purlwise, just like so. But then we're going to purl all 19 remaining stitches all the way through to the end. So to purl, just like so, right? So try to keep your form minimalistic, but you might be just finding it very tricky and it keeps slipping like so. Then if that's the case, place the tension downwards and then pull back up. And you can do that for now, but what I would like for you to strive towards is keeping a tight, minimalistic form where you minimize your movements, you know. And this is going to be better for your joints and your wrists over time. So you can see here my tension isn't amazing, and that's pretty normal, but I'm going to blame it on this distraction in front of me. But that's no real excuse. I should be able to maintain a Zen focus at all times, a Taoist determination to make the best knitting possible. But it's probably going to be the case where you purl looser than you knit. It tends to be something that people find difficult. But yeah, once you can kind of get this motion in, it's not that much harder than knitting, but it's slightly harder, so it seems a lot harder. But we purl all the way through to the end, so there we are. And those are the 2 rows that we're going to keep repeating. So now we're on row number 3, so another odd row, which means slip 1 and then knit 18. Just like this. And now might be a good time to put on some music while you work, just to enjoy yourself a little more. And, just keep repeating those 2 rows. And try not to let yourself be distracted. As hard as it might be sometimes. But yeah, we must have resolve. And we purl the last stitch. There, okay. And then you can see already it's starting to kind of curl up a little. And that's another point of this lesson. What happens when you place only knit stitches on one side and then purl stitches on the other is going to cause the knitted work to warp. And in lesson 3, we're going to describe how to counteract that warping. But for now, this is a very important lesson that is often overlooked, and I want you to feel the consequences of knitting untethered stockinette or stocking stitch or whatever these crazy kids are calling it these days. In my humble opinion, no special name is needed. It is simply purling one side and knitting the other. So we have 5 purls remaining. And try your very best to not be influenced by outside forces while you're trying to focus. Okay, come on, we can chill out. It's just the tail end. It's not really a big deal, but, gotta keep that zen. So let's turn it around, have a look. Okay, come on. Give me some slack here. And we just begin on row number 5 by slipping 1 purlwise and then knitting 18. And you can see should be feeling the work kind of curling up towards you on the knit side. And this is what happens. It curls up from the bottom first, but then also from the sides and from the top eventually. I mean, when you've bound off, it will curl back down upon itself. You'll see what I mean at the end of the video once we're finished. But the reason for this is simply the loop structure forces the yarn to curl towards the knit side because that's just how the loops are built up. I mean, I could make you an illustration, but it wouldn't change the fact that this is going to happen no matter how good your tension is or how perfectly you're knitting. It will always curl unless you tether it on the edges, which we're going to do in lesson 3. But for now, I just want you to practice knitting and purling. That's really what this comes down to. So, just get a good flow, get a good form, and just keep it up. And if you don't like what you're seeing at any point, just stop, pull out the needle, and start over. Because the more stitches you do, the better you're going to be at doing those stitches. And it's going to take maybe 10, 20,000 before you really start to get it. So we're going to skip ahead a little. We're at 10 rows now. This is the front of the work, the knit side. And this is the purl side. So you can see the difference there is quite clear. And you can see it's curling up towards the knit side, as expected. So measuring this out, we're just over 3 centimeters. So that puts us at a third of the way. So we're going to need 30 rows to complete the project. Or possibly some more or less, depending on your tension. But the essence is you want a 10 by 10 centimeter or a 4 by 4 inch square or something akin to that. I mean, it's going to curl up into a little ball. at the end, so it's going to be hard to measure, but, I believe in your ability to make something vaguely reminiscent of a 10 by 10 square. And that is all that matters here. After all, we're just practicing. We're not trying to make incredibly aesthetically appealing objects yet. We'll get to that, but first we need to focus on what's right in front of us, and that is the knit stitch and the purl stitch, the two sides of the coin. And in saying that, I do not at all wish to undermine the value of this stitch. It is incredibly versatile. The amount of different combinations and aesthetic approaches you can take is literally, I mean that in the sense of the actual word, infinite. Infinite. There is no limit. And if you spend any length of time reading knitting books, blogs, watching YouTube videos, you're going to come across people claiming that such and such combination of knits and purls is referred to as this name, like seed stitch, moss stitch, stockinette stitch, rib stitch, and the list goes on and on and on because it's infinite, and it's futile to try to name these things. It is much more productive to think of it in terms of different ways of using one stitch, and that's what I want for your mind to incept. And we're back from Arrogance Island, looking at our work. This is the knit side, and you can see it's really starting to want to curl up towards itself. And we're about, let's have a look here, 5 centimeters in, so we're halfway there. And you can see now the sides are starting to curl in as well, but you can tell it's an even amount of stitches, so it should be just over, I'd say 16. It's probably 16. But we're going to count it out. But looking at it, it's just kind of a red wall. So you have to look very closely and kind of stretch it out like this. You can see there are these individual nodes running up, making up these loops. And that's what we want to count. Just all the way down there. If we isolate this one stitch here. So that's 1 on the top there, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That's what we're looking for. 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, and 16. Just at the bottom there. We don't count the very bottom because that's the cast on. But that's 16, right? Think about it like a programmer, counting from 0. Starting from 0. 0 is the cast on. Regardless, it's not important. We counted 16, and now let's just continue, do the last 14, and we'll have 30. Let's look for a second at the knit stitch. It goes like this, right? It's sort of this 3-phase movement, whereas you enter the loop, pull the yarn back through, and then drop the loop that you entered, right? So it's like this, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And that's kind of the mechanics of it. Approach it as a 3-phase mechanical process. And the purl is slightly different, right? So let's have a look at the purl here. Let's turn it around, and we're going to slip the first one purl-wise like we have been doing on every round. And now look, it's more of a 4-phased process, right? Because you got to place the yarn on top of the left needle, then go into the loop on the left needle, and then grab the yarn, pull it back through, and then remove that loop, the worked stitch, off of the left needle, right? So it's 1, 2, 3, 4. Which is strange because it's technically the same thing as a knit, only backwards. And the first time someone tried to explain how to purl to me, that's what they said. It's a backwards knit stitch. And that meant nothing to me. So hopefully I've now explained it in a way that makes some morsel of sense to you. Anyway, if you can grasp the mechanics of the motion, you're in good shape. The concepts will follow. And we're magically at row 30, and we're ready to bind off. But let's first look at this monstrosity. Look, it's curling in from the sides. The tension, I suppose, is relatively decent, so that's not really the reason or the problem here. It's just that if you place all the knit stitches on one side and the purls on the other, it's going to want to curl in from all directions over itself. See, like if I just place that up there, it's going to stick. And once we bind off, it's going to come in from the top, you know. So let's have a look and make sure we're at 10, right? So it's 10 tall, and I won't even bother trying to measure the width. You know, I know it's 10, but it will never look like it because of the curling, right? So we're going to bind off slightly differently from lesson 1, but more or less the same principle. You're going to slip one purlwise, and last time we did a yarn over here to create slack. This time we're going to skip that, and we're going to see the consequences of that. So you just knit one like so, and then you pick up that slip stitch and drop it over that knit just like that, right? And then give yourself a bunch of slack, like more slack than you think you need. And then knit one, and then drop that slack slip stitch over. And you can tighten it if you want, but like honestly, you're going to want more slack than you think you need, right? So just keep on doing that. Slack and knit, and then lift it over, drop it down, give yourself slack, knit, lift it off, drop it over. And you can see already how it's starting to curl. Oh man, this is like gross to look at. But yeah, it's a very important lesson to learn now before you try to do something major like a sweater or a scarf especially. That really burns if you try to do a sort of a flat knit scarf where purls on one side, knits on the other, and it just curls into like this sausage. And that feeling is just awful, and I do not wish it upon you. But let's skip right ahead to the last bit here. So you can see we're giving it a bunch of slack, but it's still like relatively tight. So in this bind off method, like rather than doing the yarn over, just give yourself a bunch of slack. So we're here at the last one, just slip that over. There's no more to knit, so we gotta just break off the yarn, right? So a lot of people will tell you not to pull the yarn because you'll ruin the tension and such, and they're like, oh, you need to cut it. But it's not true. Just hold it like this and yank, and you will never transfer the tension into the work. It hurts your fingers a little, but that is temporary. You'll survive. So what you do now is you just pull that yarn through that loop all the way through and give it a little tighten, and we have our sausage. See? That is what happens. That is what happens, and that is what we need to avoid. So you see, you can try to like flatten it out, but it will always just return to that same crinkled shape. And you can try to block it, whatever, it won't help. It's useless. This is where we'd sew in our ends, and I've decided to make a video on how to do that properly, but I'm not going to do it on this one because it's useless.